Hi, this is Elizabeth Stephen. I'm business librarian at Western. This is a video to go over how to use some resources to do some secondary research for your assignment for Marketing 382. For this assignment, you need to do some research on radio, and you need to think about radio in a couple of different ways. You need to think about radio on a larger scale or like higher level, industry level radio information, and then also information related to a local radio or community radio. But you also need to think about who the competitors are of radio, and so that's when you start thinking about internet radio, streaming media, that type of thing. So I'm going to show you some databases to help you kind of dissect and dive into some of these topics. Before we get started, I want to talk a little bit about some things to consider before you search. When you are looking at radio stations versus radio broadcasting or radio networks, they often define different things. If you look at this definition related to radio stations are the establishments engaged in broadcasting programming that may or may not originate from that station. Then it's talking about a physical radio station. And this is also a definition that does not include or apply to internet or streaming audio. Radio broadcasting or networks generally applies to those that are creating the programming and then transmitting it to affiliates, being the radio station. This also does not apply to internet or streaming audio. So while you are searching, remember that as you are going through. Because you are also looking for things that are related to local or community radio, those are some search terms to think about. With this search, you're also going to want to think about who is listening to the radio, who is the audience, who is donating, because community radio is probably getting most of their funding from donations, similar to, say, National Public Radio or NPR on a higher or national scale or regional scale. So these are some search terms to think about when looking for regional or local. I'm going to encourage you to look in both Business Source Complete and Communication and Mass Comm Complete. These are both EBSCO databases that can be searched at the same time. They both cover media and communications, but from a slightly different perspective. And I think that you will find both of them fairly helpful. So let's get started. Open up Business Source Complete. Business Source Complete and Communication and Mass Comm Complete, again, both EBSCO databases. If you click on Choose Databases, this brings you to a list of all of our EBSCO databases. Business Source is selected. You can click on the Comm Mass Media Complete here, and then OK. So let's just go ahead and start. I am going to start with a really simple search like radio station. Let's do radio stations. I know from doing this search, this is actually a little too general of a search. It really was not that useful. There are a few things I want to point out before we get any deeper or go any farther. You will see some industry reports pop up when you search for radio stations and radio networks. This is one of them. They're going to be listed as United States radio station industry reports, or sometimes Barnes reports. While you can often find fairly decent industry reports in Business Source Complete, these types of reports are not going to be useful to you in this assignment. They tend to list number of radio stations by state or that type of thing. That is really not going to be helpful for you in this assignment. There are other ways that you can find industry information. So I would ignore those when they come up. Looking at over on the left side of the screen, you see you can filter information by trade publications. Usually pretty helpful. With something as general as radio station, it might not be as helpful. And then down here, you can see the number of sources that are coming from the different databases. Looking at radio stations in general, I would stick to looking at things like radio station audience to kind of get a feel for who is listening to radio. Again, at that higher scale. Results that you're going to get in here will be international, so I would also recommend coming down to Geography and selecting just the United States. When you are searching, it's not just a matter of looking at the specific articles or documents that you're finding. It's also looking at the results for other search terms. This article at the top, Public Space, Private Face, Audience Construction on a Non-Commercial Radio Station. Now this is from 1998. It is somewhat dated. Well, it's quite a bit dated. There may still be some useful information in this article, but one of the things that really struck me was this phrase non-commercial radio station. As I mentioned, some of the other terms to think about are like community radio, non-commercial radio. So I am actually, that is one of the things that made me think about searching for this. So I am going to search for non-commercial radio. That changes things. This top one, best practices in non-commercial fundraising, practitioner perspective. This looks really interesting. Let's see. So we take a look at this. It uses in-depth qualitative interviews with radio professionals to identify best practices for non-commercial radio fundraising. When you're looking at local radio or community radio, they don't have large budgets, and more than likely they are getting their funding through donations or fundraising. So this could be really interesting and relevant to what you are doing. Now it's from 2014. I still say that makes it pretty relevant. Full text is here. Now let's just take a look at this a second. One of the things that pops out at me just on this first page is this sentence in the second paragraph. Non-commercial stations serve their communities by providing specialized programming that's not widely available on commercial radio stations. That one sentence actually tells me quite a bit. And this sentence is cited. The author cites a couple other authors. With an academic article like this, you can easily go to the end of the article to their references and then see who they cited and go from there. I think that looking at this article would be a really good place to start when thinking about local or community radio. I think I'd be able to find a decent amount of information from here. So let's go back to our results. This next one also looks good. Fundraising practices at non-commercial radio station. But if I look at the authors, Josh Bentley, this is from 2012, this is from 2014. I know because I looked at these earlier. This second one is actually a conference presentation, and it is generally the same article, just presented at a conference. This academic journal is one that has been published in a journal. They are, for the most part, the same thing. So that might look like you found really two good articles. You found one really good article. So let's see. Some of this is looking at some historical stuff, maybe not quite as useful, but still that phrase non-commercial radio seemed to be really useful. I also want to try the phrase community radio. I found that community radio, I initially was thinking of the search for local radio, but I found that community radio seemed to be a much better type of search. So community radio in a commercial broadcast landscape, that's looking at Kenya. Again, what you're going to find in here is going to be international. Now the second one, community radio and governance, leadership and relationship. This could also be useful. So community radio management, leadership. Again, interesting search terms, maybe things to think about. Now this is looking in Ireland. Volunteers, managers, and members of the board of directors at 4 community radio stations. Although this is not focused on the U.S., I still think there might be something in here that could be useful, especially when you're thinking about volunteers, managers, and members, kind of those relationships and how they work together or don't work together to run a community radio station. So another thing using community radio that I think could be useful. Here's another one, exploring the link between community radio and the community. Now, a lot of these articles that we are finding are academic articles. Normally, when you're doing business research, a lot of the stuff that you're looking for will be coming from trade journals, industry reports. These articles, if you look here at database, are coming from Communication and Mass Media Complete. So you see you're getting some different types of articles using that COM database versus the business database. So this is looking at alternative radio. Now, alternative radio broadcasting, alternative mass media, other search terms that you can use to continue to search. So these two words, community radio and non-commercial radio seem to be pretty good. We can combine those to do a more complex search. So I am going to do what we call nesting. It's where we take community radio and then we say or. Now, if I search like this with the phrase, it would be okay, but it still would not be that great of a search. I'm going to make this even a little better. When you put something in quotes and then in parentheses, it's just kind of an extra assurance that, the phrase that you're looking for will be found as a phrase and not just individual words. So this alone is a search, just having these two things in like this, community radio, non-commercial, looking for or. That means either one of those items, either one of those words or phrases needs to be in the results. But what I am going to do, I'm going to do what we call nesting. I'm going to put them in parentheses like that, and then put that whole phrase in parentheses, both of them in parentheses. What that does is by doing this, the database treats these two phrases as one word. It searches them at the same time. It broadens the search because it's going to look for community radio or non-commercial, but as a search, it is much more concise because it is treating it as a specific phrase. Some things you're going to see some of the same articles showing up. I'm going to take a look at this one. This is from 2017. This is also looking at Australia. Talking about how community radio can promote a culturally diverse society. How community broadcasting is uniquely positioned to provide opportunities for volunteering, community participation, and sociability of niche communities. So you're looking at the effects and the benefits of community radio. So I've seen a few things that have come out that are related just to, they're international. I want to look at things that are just related to the U.S. Over here on the side, you'll see geography. I can click on the United States, and I'll filter out just those that are from the U.S. Now this top one right here, impact of digital convergence on community radio in the USA. I'm going to say right now, looking at that title, that's probably going to be useful. How does local radio use Twitter? Talk about marketing themselves. Here's another one, this KBOO Community Radio, Organized Portland's Disorderly Possibilities. This is from 2005, but despite that, I still think this could be useful. This is looking at a specific radio station, and I think it's looking at preceding National Public Radio, grassroots activist movement. Again, I think there could be some useful information in an article like that. This type of search is a pretty good one. We can then also go ahead and start adding phrases like audience, donor, fundraising, listeners. See what happens when we add audience to the search. Study of participation in alternative media practices. Construction of a non-commercial radio station, also good. I really think some of the database that may be the most useful will be the common mass media, primarily because it's probably going to get more into audience behavior and that type of thing. So this is an overview of how you can use Business Source Complete and Communication and Mass Media Complete to find some articles related to both radio broadcasting, radio stations in the radio industry, as well as more specific local radio and non-commercial radio. Now, of course, these are not the only types of searches you can do in here. Experiment with different types of search terms, see what you can find out, but this shows you some of the options that you have available. Please don't hesitate to contact me if you need help. The best way to get a hold of me is by email.